Hi, I'm Amitha Balachandra. I do the 6:30 p.m. show every single day. I'm so sorry for us going live late because we were trying to figure out the connection of the guest, and this sort of thing will happen here and there. But let's get started. This is a 6:30 show that I do every single day. Make sure you ask your questions. The chat window is open. We hope to make this conversation interactive, where we pick up one important topic every single day and discuss it with one person. Now, today I have a really important topic to discuss, and that is based on an Indian Express article, and we'll put up that article on the screen, which has said that according to the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Rules 2020, which is issued by the Union Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, it said that transgender people will no longer have to go through a medical examination in order to declare their desired sex. Now, this is something that transgender people have been campaigning ever since the bill was passed in the Rajya Sabha in November. It was passed in Lok Sabha in August. It was then passed in Rajya Sabha amid severe opposition. Several people took to the street saying that this does not protect their rights, and hence changes have to be made. It was passed in the Rajya Sabha in November, and post that, the draft rules were out in the open for suggestions and feedback in July. What we're seeing now in the rules that were notified on the 25th of September, this is what they say, that they've said that transgender people will no longer have to go through a medical examination in order to declare their desired sex. Now, a lot of demands had come in from members within the community. Will go through those demands and whether all of those demands have been addressed by the center or not, because this, remember, is a big step for members within the community. And to discuss that, I have somebody really special with me. We have Nishtha Nishant, who is a transgender rights activist, a fearless trans woman, and most importantly, she's also a scientific researcher. Join us for this conversation. Nishtha, many thanks for making time to have this really important conversation. And for people who are watching at this point, please ask your questions in the chat window and we'll take them up during the course of the conversation. But Nishtha, your first reaction to the rules that have now been notified by the center notified it on the 25th of September. This is a big step.
Of course. Well, thank you, Amitha, for having me here today. It is really a major step taken by the center, acknowledging the fact that a lot of trans folks really want to get self-identified rather than presenting themselves in front of a chief medical officer or a district magistrate to prove their own identity is something that is very unpleasant and something which we really don't want to do it, because it takes a very long time for each one of us to be the true version of ourselves. And it isn't an easy journey. So, considering the amount of suffering and the lot of stress that each trans person has to go through, we've been struggling and we've been raising our voices to gain that particular right, and that's right to self-identify. And today, this particular notification came out, and it's kind of a relief to all the trans folks who really want to identify themselves the way they want to and not somebody else's need.
And Nisha, I want to take a moment to go through the rules. This is a very important point that's been made in the rules, and I went through the rules myself. It says, subject to the correctness of the applicant's particulars, get the application processed based on the affidavit submitted declaring the gender identity of any person. And this is really important. It says, without any medical or physical examination, and thereafter issue an identification number of the applicant. So up until now, there was a mandatory medical examination, right? A physical examination.
Right.
Explain to us what the process was. Why was it so important for this to be removed? What kind of discrimination members within the community faced?
So the requirement of undergoing the sex affirming or gender affirming surgeries is something that was mentioned earlier. And as we know, a lot of trans folks cannot afford for any medical treatments, be it in terms of affordability of finance, the stigma by the medical officers, and many other experiences which are not really conducive or favorable for them to be who they want to. So it was constantly, like a pricking stone for us that this was existing. But now that it is not, it
Hmm.
is really very important to acknowledge the fact that a person wants to identify themselves the way they want to without undergoing any kind of medical interventions, which is a great thing. And it is really, really very important to understand that not everybody can afford for any kind of treatments, which
Hmm.
few of them do. But it's again up to them, according to the situation, that they want to proceed further.
And one of the other points that I also want to make, somebody has pointed out in the chat window, Heartthrob has spoken about toilets. And this is something that I also want to point out. The other important point in the rule is that there will be separate wards and washrooms for transgender people. How important was that?
Of course, it is very important. The amount of suffering that a trans person has to go through when they seek for, facilities such as a washroom, a gender-neutral washroom, or for that matter, a particular ward or space in hospitals, it gets very difficult, especially when they get pushed into a zone where they don't want to get into. For example, for a trans woman to get pushed into a men's washroom or a men's ward is something which is very uncomfortable. It happened with me where I was forced, or rather, I was told to get into the men's washroom just because my documents were not matching to that of my gender expression. And sadly, people did not understand the truth that I am equally prone to, any kind of sexual violence as much as any cisgender woman could have been. So it is very important that people understand that it is up to a person's convenience that they need to make the usage of the facility that they require. So hopefully there would be steps taken forward to create an infrastructure where people would get to utilize or make use of facilities like a gender neutral washroom, or for that matter a gender neutral ward in case of hospitals and spaces where there's actually a requirement of gender neutral spaces.
I also want to talk to you about the other demands that members within the community had. And you yourself, in a conversation with me earlier, said that you were involved in that suggestion process as well. Take us through what suggestions members within the community made, because there were protests across the country after November. We saw a huge Twitter storm as well, saying that this is not something people within the community want.
Right. So there were several requirements that were not addressed in the transgender bill, which then became an act. And surprisingly, there were no mention of reservation in education system or medical facilities. There were no definitions which were clearly mentioning what were the requirements, or to prove or our identity, or to present ourselves as of a particular gender to the district magistrate or the medical officers. Like transgender folks experience incongruence and go through certain phases which not everyone can experience, and the journey is quite difficult. So the right to self-identify was very important. This was one of the primary requirement which has been addressed in this particular modification that has been made in this particular act. But apart from this, there are several others that really needs to be spoken about, particularly right to lodge a complaint. When we say that a particular offense has been taken against a trans person, earlier it was mentioned that it would be taken into consideration that the person who is an offender would be jailed for 2 years, whereas in case of a cis person, the punishment would be lifetime imprisonment. Here, we really need to understand that a lot of trans folks who are involved into commercial sex working also experience sexual violence, something which is not consensual, and it is against, and it needs to be considered as crime. And the right to make a complaint is also something required and then necessary for them. It is not mentioned, sadly, in this particular aspect.
So
uh,
I want to, yes, I want to go over the points that you made. A couple of points that people were making as soon as the bill was passed in the Rajya Sabha. One, you mentioned that there was no reservation in education and employment. That was something that members within the community needed. Apart from the change that we've seen right now, the bill also failed to protect people who face sexual abuse. That's exactly what you pointed out. There is no definition of discrimination. And the other point that I want to talk about is that the bill provided for transgender people to only recognize them as a transgender unless they go through a sex reassignment. I want to talk about sex reassignment because in this bill, in this act, that the rules that have been notified on the 25th of September, and I'll read out the rule. Give me a moment. If a transgender person undergoes medical intervention towards a gender affirming procedure, either as male or female, such person may apply in Form 1. So the rules already say if a transgender person undergoes medical intervention. What about people who don't want to perhaps undergo medical intervention?
Right. Well, that is something where people need to be considerate enough to understand that not everybody can undergo medical interventions. And it needs to be defined, it needs to be addressed. And I particularly would like to mention that, when this particular act or bill is formed, it is very important to have collective information from members of the trans community,
Mm,
because this particular act or bill is for the trans community, and we are
mm,
failing to understand largely because every trans person would have some or the other requirement which may or may not get addressed, and having conversations with them is very important. It does not
apart,
mean that,
yes,
sorry,
yes, go
it does
ahead.
not mean that you need to only consider a particular sector of the transgender umbrella. Transgender umbrella is a wide term, and under that, there are several other categories which are a part of the transgender umbrella. But we focus only on one particular or two particular categories, and that's really sad.
And also talk to us about reservation for employment, education. Rahul Pandey has said for transgender people, reservation is literally needed. Tell us why is it needed. Help us understand what kind of discrimination you face. Because in the rules that have been notified, it just says equal opportunity has to be given. Who's going to be doing it? Who's going to monitor? None of that is mentioned.
So there's no clarity about it, and that is needed. I know for the fact, from my personal experience, no matter how much ever qualified I was not getting employed just for the reason that I identify myself as a transgender person.
Hmm.
And even if people wanted to give me employment, it was just at a lower level or a level where I really don't deserve to be. And people fail to understand that we are as human as they are, and we are as capable as they are, and we can do as good as they can. So there is a requirement of having reservations for trans employment, especially when we see a lot of transgender members are educated, are deserving, and have attained that qualification which can help them to be at a level matching to any other person in the society. But we are taking away those rights just because they identify themselves as a transgender person, which is not the thing. We need to focus on their talents, their potential, their capabilities, and then give them an opportunity to be at a level where they can be with us.
The other question that's coming in, and for viewers who are watching, please ask your questions. It helps us make the conversation interactive. Paridhi has given her question, and thank you for the contribution, Paridhi. She says, I think separate schools or college for trans people amounts to segregation. What is your view on that?
I would not be really very happy to go in a school where there would be only queer folks.
Hmm.
Why? When we had schools which included both boys and girls, why are we, keeping a separate school for trans folks? Are they not the part of the society? Are we not the part of the society? And are we not deserving to be in a space where everyone else deserves to be? So if there is a person, if there's a child who identifies themselves as a transgender person, there could be ways of having a communication, or helping them out in their journey by accepting them, by creating an environment where they could live happily and be the true version of themselves. And that would really make a difference in a person's life, rather than putting them in a school where you know treating them like they are um, specially abled. we are not specially abled. We are as abled as any other human being.
All right, so you're saying that that leads to more discrimination. I have a
Of
couple of
course.
questions before I let you go. We're running out of time. But one of the things that I also want to know is the process itself, because the rules very clearly say that the magistrate, district magistrate, can reject. In case of rejection made under Rule 3, district magistrate will inform the applicant and the applicant can appeal. But that time period is 90 days, 30 days. So do you believe that this is just getting lost with time? The process itself is punishment?
More than the time, of course, it is a punishment. More than the time, the amount of mental trauma that a trans person would be experiencing is tremendous. And the implications would be really very bad. And that needs to be considered. We are talking about a community that has been kept on corners on the periphery for years ago. And like now, when we are taking steps to bring about changes, at least make those changes favorable by being considerate towards them. And this is not really going to help by extending the time period, because the amount of stigma and the discrimination that will be experienced by this particular person would be really, really impactful on their mental health.
Okay, we'll take one question before we wrap up the conversation. Saifur has said, instead of reservation, wouldn't it be better if companies were forced to have gender neutral qualifying tests?
Well, organizations would love to be gender neutral,
Hmm.
to carry the flag of the queer community along with them. But it depends on how they would take ahead this particular force of being inclusive. Not all organizations would be in a position to have gender sensitization workshops. And when they are not taking a basic step, there's no point in forcing any organization to be an all-inclusive one, or rather have everybody from the queer community getting employed in an organization. The
And
change
very,
will begin
yeah,
from self, and that is
yeah.
more important.
Okay. And one last question. So you believe that this is a good first step, but there are more changes to come in.
Yes, of course. We are hopeful that there would be many more changes that would take place, considering that this particular step has been taken and the community wants the change, because these particular changes are for the community, for the transgender community. And let's not forget that.
All right. So a couple of things that Nishtha mentioned very importantly, that the fact that medical examination is ruled out is a good first step. The community welcomes it, and the fact that there was discrimination earlier there and now is something that the community welcomes. The fact that it's been removed. However, it also depends on implementation. But a couple of more changes that they're also asking for. One is reservation for education, employment. Two, the fact that the sex modification is not required, for instance, because that is a rule. They say that sex reassignment is necessary and that should be done away with. And the fact that there are separate washrooms, of course, is a good welcome step. Nishtha, thank you so much for joining us. I hope to have more of these conversations in the next coming days as well. We keep a watch out on the rules and how it's going to be implemented as well. And for viewers who are joining us and watching us right now, thank you so much for joining in, for your feedback as well. Tell us who you want us to pick up every day, and we'll make sure that we try and bring them on board. We'll come back again at 6:30 every single day, but do come back at 8 p.m. because there's another important conversation that's coming up that Faye will be doing on the Hathras case. We know that a 19-year-old Dalit teen was brutally sexually assaulted. She passed away, but late night we got news that her body was allegedly cremated against her family's wishes. That's coming up at 8 p.m. Do join in for that conversation. Thanks for watching.